and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones, and we are so glad to have you here. Coming up on the show, we're going to be talking about recent cuts under the school funding formula that have many school districts scrambling to deal with budget cuts. Standing by is Assemblyman Alex Sauickie, who has a bill to appropriate $210 million to the districts who saw these unexpected cuts. First up, though, the federal bribery trial of Senator Bob Menendez continues to play out like a made-for-TV movie. According to recent unsealed court papers, Senator Menendez's defense could be taking an approach that would shift the blame to his wife, claiming she kept him in the dark about these alleged illegal dealings. Joining me now is David Wildstein, editor of the New Jersey Globe. David, it is good to see you. Always good to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Laura.
All right, so let's bring the audience up to speed. Senator Menendez and his wife, they are co-defendants, but they are being tried separately. So let's talk a little bit about this recent bombshell that came out in these court papers that suggested that Menendez could actually throw his wife under the bus, for lack of a better words. Were you surprised?
Yeah, I should say, yes, I was surprised. And then I paused and I said, this is New Jersey. And why am I surprised? Because of course he's blaming his wife. Of course, it wasn't him. The interesting thing to me is that they were supposed to be tried together. Menendez had moved to sever the two cases so that they'd be tried separately. Initially, that was denied. And then Nadine Menendez, his wife, came forward and told the judge that she's having some serious medical issues, that she can't go on trial May 6th, and asked to move this entirely to the summer. The judge says, okay, we're going to move you to July or August, but your husband, Senator Menendez, he's still going to be tried starting on May 6th. So that's how the separation began.
All right, so we have two separate trials. It does sound, and this is one of the questions that I posed in the beginning, it is plausible, especially when you're in elected office. You know what you're doing. You typically should know what's right, what's wrong. It could be plausible that his wife kept him in the dark about things, but it's certainly not rubbing people the right way because, again, it's being perceived as throwing your own wife under the bus. But I mean, isn't there, not everything a husband and wife does that they don't always communicate everything. And his wife isn't an elected official. She might have said, oh, hey, I know my husband can help you out with X, Y, and Z. Is that, I guess it's plausible. What do you think?
Sure. It's plausible. I mean, anything's plausible. What he's doing is he's blaming his wife for becoming involved in a criminal conspiracy. And then she kept the details of that conspiracy from him. It doesn't answer how the gold bars wound up in his closet and why that didn't occur to him that something might be off, that she's getting paid in gold bars. But look, this is a tough situation. This is his second indictment. And remember, he only needs one juror to disagree with the government's case against him in order to at least get a hung jury.
Right.
A hung jury won't protect his Senate seat, but it could protect his freedom.
Right. Well, you just need that reasonable doubt, right? And reasonable
Right.
doubt. Again, there's a court of public opinion, and then there's what is allowed in a court of law. And Menendez, right away came out and said, there are reasons that I save my money and do things the way I do because of my background. But being a family that immigrated from Cuba, there's a different mindset. So, again, how plausible is that when you have somebody who is a sitting member of U.S. Senate?
It's of dubious plausibility, but I think what's important here, and I'm not a lawyer, and I haven't seen both sides of it, and you try to stay objective. The political career for him is over. So, court of public opinion, I don't know that matters. Right now, what he's worried about is not going to prison, of protecting his freedom. And I think he's doing everything that he has to do in order to, avoid a conviction, whether it's an acquittal or a hung jury.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about his career being over. If he is acquitted, though, he has said, I'm not running in the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate, but it's possible, but he wouldn't rule out that he might actually run in the general election as an independent Democrat. How likely do you think that is to happen if he's acquitted? Do you think he really would run?
If he's acquitted, he might. I've known him 35 years. He's an angry guy. And I've thought about this recently. I've known him for so long, and we were, young mayors together back in the 1980s. If he's acquitted, if he's found guilty, I don't know what I'm going to say to him, because I've been as tough on him as anybody has, and to be wrongfully accused of something, that's a horrible thing. There'd be a lot of people that would owe him apologies, but still, you have to look at the life that he's led. And there's two sides to Bob Menendez. There's the side where he's helped a lot of people and he's done a lot of good things, and then there's the side where he's been under federal investigations numerous times, indicted twice. First time, a hung jury in the government decided not to let him. Not to prosecute him again. He's lucky enough to be returned to the U.S. Senate. Now he's got these new allegations against him, and the backdrop of all this, which may be, for objectively, a horrible thing, is his son is up for reelection as a congressman from Hudson County. Trial starts May 6th. The primary is June 4th. His son's constituents are going to hear on a daily basis all the allegations against his father, and innocent or guilty, that's not going to be good for Rob Menendez Jr. There was and I'm playing to you deliberately here, Laura.
Yeah.
I don't frequently talk about Broadway musicals,
Yeah.
but in Man of La Mancha, there was this song, which I will under no circumstances sing, that says that whether the pitcher hits the stone, meaning a glass pitcher, whether the pitcher hits the stone or the stone hits the pitcher, it's going to be bad for the pitcher. And these allegations, whether they are accurate or inaccurate, they're going to be bad for Bob Menendez, and they're going to be bad for his son.
And what do you make of, you've known him for so long, does he still have a core group of people who are supporting him? Because what struck me is when these allegations came out back in September, almost immediately everybody in the state was calling for him to resign. And again, as a reporter, what strikes me is, I get that, but also what happened to innocent until proven guilty? One thing, what do you make of that? Because people immediately wanted to distance themselves and almost convict him before he even had time to make it to the podium for a press conference.
Yeah, and innocent until proven guilty is not something, and it may be fair that it's this way. Not necessarily a presumption that's given to those who are in elective office, who are supposed to live their lives at a higher standard than everybody else. Well, there's no the indictment. I mean, the circumstances of the indictment were certainly a surprise. It was much more salacious than people expected, but we all knew there was an investigation, and Democratic Party leaders had discussed prior to the unsealing of the indictment what they would do. The most important thing I believe is that when he was first indicted back in 2014, 2015, everybody stood with him. They refused and rejected any discussion of he should resign, he shouldn't run again. There was a lot of talk this time that we're not going to do it again. Burn once, shame on me. Type of a. I think I got that wrong, but I think you know what I mean.
Right.
This time it was clear they weren't going to stick with him,
Yeah.
and it had the added issue of this being really in one election cycle,
Yeah.
and a lot of people didn't want that this time. So all the people that stuck with him, they're pretty much the same people who stuck with him in in the first indictment were right out of the box to say we're not doing this again.
So you addressed how this definitely could impact his son, who's running for re-election in his congressional spot. But what about other Democrats? Andy Kim talked mostly about county lines, but also about, well, part of county lines is the good old boy network, that inside network, not necessarily the corruption we're talking about with Menendez, but can you talk about the ripple effect it has on other Democrats in office, or how Republicans might use it, or any outsider looking to come in and run, about just corruption in New Jersey overall, how that kind of taints, or maybe it doesn't taint. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm not sure it does. I think it could serve the purpose of depressing Hispanic voter turnout in this year's election. If there's some people angry about how Bob Menendez was treated, but there's not enough people on the ballot. Really nobody's stuck with him, so nobody's responsible for him. We saw a little of this right after the indictment in the fall of 23, where some Republicans running for the legislature tried to make Bob Menendez's indictment an issue. That didn't stick. I don't really think that's going to be a big deal at this point. I'll tell you what I do think is going to be interesting to watch is if he is convicted, he's going to appeal. There's no doubt he's going to continue to maintain his innocence. He's going to appeal, and he's not going to want to leave the United States Senate. And that changes the landscape considerably. If you have a man in the United States Senate who is voting on important issues, including the confirmation of federal judges, who's been convicted of a crime and won't leave. That's different than somebody who's got the presumption of innocence. That would put the United States Senate, the Democratic majority in the United States Senate, in an uncomfortable situation going into election day if Menendez won't go.
Right, right. But not unheard of, though. Not unheard of.
No, no,
Right,
it happened in New Jersey, of
right,
course.
right.
In the 1980s, Harrison Williams was indicted and convicted in the Abscam scandal. He was caught on tape taking bribes from undercover FBI agents posing as Arab sheiks. He was convicted in early 1981 and spent more than a year in the Senate
Yeah.
appealing that, and it took the Senate that long to really get to a point where they said either leave or we're going to expel you. Now we saw with George Santos in the House, very quick to expel. The Senate probably not as much so.
Yeah. Uh, so much to keep tabs on. And again, that trial is getting started May 6th. It's just around the corner. David Wildstein of the New Jersey Globe, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Joining me now is Assemblyman Alex Sauickie, a Republican representing New Jersey's 12th legislative district. Assemblyman, welcome to the show. It's good to see you here.
Thank you. Great to be back.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about school funding. Governor Murphy announced a record increase in school funding in his most recent budget address. Most school districts are seeing an increase. So I'm going to break it down with the numbers here. 423 districts are seeing an increase, 15 districts are flat, and 140 districts are seeing cuts. So, and that 140 districts is what you're interested in talking about. So can you tell us a little bit about this school formula as it stands now, how it's been proposed, and what lawmakers are grappling with now?
Yeah, well, the school formula is commonly known now as S2. It was implemented under the Murphy administration in 2018. It has proven to be absolutely disastrous. What you mentioned about the 140 school districts losing money, they've lost $104 million this year collectively, while the Newark City School District received $101 million of that 104. So almost dollar for dollar. Again, nobody wants to see students in Newark do poorly, but it can't be at the expense of all these other school districts.
So when we talk about school districts in New Jersey and where a lot of the funding comes from, it is at the local level. Your local property taxes typically pay for schools. So how much comes from the state percentage-wise, and how much, generally speaking, comes from local property taxes as a rule?
Yeah, well, you hit the head on the problem, right? The S2 formula really did a number on state aid. And let's be clear on what state aid is. State aid is the proportion of income tax that's already been paid by the residents of these municipalities coming back to their school districts. The problem is that proportionately, these school districts that are losing funding are getting less back of what they've paid. As an example, the township of Jackson, which I represent, paid in 2021, which are the most recent numbers available, $68 million to the state in income tax. This year, their children are getting back $23 million of it.
Wow.
The Newark City School
District. A third
District,
of it. They're only getting a third of what they paid in for property taxes.
That's right. And to make things even more obvious, the Newark City School District, which has roughly $44 million of income tax paid by the residents of Newark, is getting $1.25 billion in state aid.
Wow.
So the numbers are very obvious of where that income is going. It's leaving the districts that are now fiscally hurting, which never were, and going to other school districts that frankly aren't performing well. And again, I said this in my testimony to the Assembly Budget Committee, nobody wants to see the children in Newark not perform well. But the issue there, it's a completely separate issue that needs to be addressed separately, and it can't be at the expense of these other school districts.
Right. Well, because we saw a state Supreme Court decision many years ago, the Abbott versus Burke, the urban versus suburban schools, that said the way to level the playing field is to give some of these poor performing urban schools more money, and ultimately, did that really pan out? The data really didn't show that it necessarily did. Can you give us some examples of what school districts are having to deal with and the decisions that they're having to make? Again, there are 140 school districts who are seeing cuts. So what does that mean? Is it property taxes going to go up? Programs get cut? What happens?
Yeah, and to be clear, it's already happened. The one thing I wanted to get across to the Assembly Budget Committee is you can't just look at this year anymore. It's cumulative cuts over the last 7 years have really destroyed these school districts. And I'll give you some examples. The Jackson School District last year had to cut over 200 positions, including teachers. They've had to cut sports teams. Their boys hockey team, for example, doesn't exist anymore because they had to cut it. The New Egypt or Plumstead School District has no clubs anymore. They literally don't have a math club or a chess club or any other clubs that you and I might have been part of as a kid because they couldn't afford the stipends for those clubs. And to give you an idea of what we're talking about in terms of state aid back to their children, the Newark City School District's getting almost $35,000 per student. Jackson is getting $3,500. All right. Brick Township, which I don't represent, is $2,800. Toms River, $1,700 per student. All right. I don't think anybody would look at that and say, hey, that probably makes sense. You know, $1,700 a student is probably all you need. All right. No. So the issue that there is that the income tax that these parents have already paid to the state isn't coming back to their children. And now the Murphy administration's solution is raise property tax. Right. We're already the #1 property tax state in the country. All right. They just need to fix the formula. I've had a bill out for over a year to fix the formula, and nothing's being done.
Right. And, you know, when you look at cutting programs, right, because nobody wants to see taxes raised. So how can you manage things, be more responsible, right? Do districts need to consolidate, right? I live in the South Hunterdon Regional School District. 3 districts came together, to consolidate. Did they really save money? I'm not really sure. But, you know, when it comes to this, you might, as an outsider, say, okay, well, if chess club has to go, it has to go. Yet as a mother myself of 3 teens with special needs, I know how important certain extracurriculars are. I know
Yep.
how important certain sports teams are, because they may not be thriving academically, but there may be other places where they find their groove, they find their people. And you need more than just valedictorians and salutatorians going out into the workforce, going out after high school and being successful. So, necessarily cutting problems isn't a solution. What's your solution?
Yeah, well, first off, if this is the second budget cycle I've been through, I've been in office for about 18 months. So I went through my first budget last year, only a couple months in. It was eye-opening. I went through line item by line item, and that's what you need to do because there are a lot of pet projects and a lot of pork in this budget. So the bill that I just put in literally reallocates line items in this upcoming budget. And I'll give you an example. Ironically, I chose to focus on a French art museum that was allocated in the budget last year. It's a project earmarked in Jersey City. Last year's budget had $13 million allocated to it. This year's budget has $18 million. In a real irony, the former governor, McGreevey, who's expressed interest to run as mayor of that town, has said he would kill that project. $58 million has been allocated to that project, but not spent.
Right.
So when I spoke to the budget committee, I offered it up. I said, go get the 58 million back. That's a real dent in the problem we have here. So the bill that I just put in specifically line items in the budget that need to be reallocated to this year's school problem. All right. And it's real money. It's a lot of money because the districts we're talking about are in that bad a shape. And as I mentioned, it can't be just focusing on the cuts for this year. They're beyond that at this point. School districts.
Yeah, go ahead.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think you're about ready to go. The question I was asking before we went on camera, the school districts are actually having to take loans out?
Yeah, that's right. I've got 2 in my legislative district alone. So 2 out of 16 school districts will have to take a loan this year. Jackson for the second year in a row. They borrowed $10 million last year. And what did the state do to their budget this year? They cut it another $4.5 million after taking a $10 million loan.
Yeah.
To pour salt in the wound, they assigned them a state monitor and told the district they have to pay the $160,000 for the state monitor. So this is what's happening in these school districts. And in one of the counties I represent, Ocean, I know of at least 6 school districts in Ocean County alone that will have to take a loan this year.
Can you tell me a little bit about the support you're getting in Trenton? Democrats have control of the Senate, the Assembly, obviously, the governor's office. You are a Republican. How much support are you getting from other Republicans and from the other side of the aisle?
Yeah, I think I've built a reputation, and my colleagues across the aisle now know that I am looking to work with them. I've had some really good success in my first year. Even though I'm in the minority, I've had a couple of bills signed into law by the governor, and it's because they're common sense, and I'm willing to work with people on both sides on common sense issues. This is not an issue that just affects Republican districts. It may seem like it, and it may seem like maybe proportionately there are more, but I can tell you for sure, I know there are colleagues of mine that are Democrats who represent very good school districts that are getting decimated right now from the same funding formula. So I am working with them. We just signed or passed a bill, I should say, in the Assembly ironically on tax day on the 15th that will address some short-term things. But as I said from the Assembly floor, it's not solving the problem because it's just not addressing the underlying issue, and it's not providing enough funding for these school districts that have already been hit so hard over the last 7 years. So that bill was sponsored by a Democrat. I worked with that member. I supported the bill just because it's needed at this point, but I continue to work with colleagues across the aisle on other legislation and certainly encourage them to join in legislation I've put in, and let's try to fix this problem together. I don't think anybody is really saying they don't acknowledge that this funding formula that we have is a problem. Yeah. But we got to work on it though.
Yeah, just final thoughts when it comes to priorities, because there are so many priorities and you are up against a June 30th deadline to get this budget passed.
Yeah.
Do you see this as a top priority for both sides? Because, we've got a lot of issues in New Jersey.
Yeah, I think it is. And you're seeing members on both sides put forth legislation around this, some of which, as I mentioned, have been acted on. So you definitely have members on both sides of the aisle who recognize this as a problem, who have schools within their legislative districts that have been severely impacted by this and are making steps towards it. My message from the floor last Monday was the bill that we passed that day isn't it. Like, we're not done here. We have to do a fast follow. We have to do something more to ensure that these districts are survivable, because some of these districts have already been told by the Department of Education they can't take a loan. So they may need a loan, but they're being told they can't take a loan. So now what?
Yeah.
So if we don't do something, they're going to be in a really bad spot.
All right, Assemblyman, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, to give an update. We'll be checking in with you throughout this process. And again, thank you for your thoughts.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate it.
And that is going to do it for today. I'm Laura Jones. Thanks so much for watching New Jersey Politics. We look forward to seeing you back here next time.